So in review, we have prunes as the weapon and two suspects. Francis Scott Key, otherwise known as Frank,
Or Frankie.
or Frankie, and a soldier.
Juliana, I see you're making sausages. Oh, and it's smoky. You might want to take them off the
Try.
griddle. Yeah, drink some water. And it looks like you have a certain glaze or reduction that you're also making right next to it. Can you tell me a little bit about that and why it relates to our murder?
Yes, so this reduction is actually prune juice boiled down into a syrup. The reason I'm cooking with that today, y'all, is because of our very special and very old murder. Um, it has something to do with it, but I don't want to delve too deep into it. So, Andrew, why don't you tell him what happened on the fateful day in 1776? In 1776.
Um, yes, you can finish the lyrics if you want.
1776, New York City. Pardon me.
Yeah, 1776, New York City. It is where our victim lives. It is where our three suspects live, and it is where the witness lives.
A cast of characters,
And we're about to
unfortunately.
unfold them.
Yes, we are. And unfortunately, we don't have any of them on the podcast because, they're dead. They've been long dead, but we do have some of their ancestors that will come on a little later.
And before we go any further, we actually we dug up the bones of Francis Scott Key, and we recreated what his voice must have sounded like based on his bone structure. So we have a
Yes,
brief little
we
clip
do.
of that here. I'm Francis Scott Key. You can call me Frank.
It's weird that he wasn't British because everyone was British at that time.
Well, he lived in New York though, so
Then where's the New York accent?
did that exist? Only I didn't look that up. I don't know. Anyways, Frank Scott Key, as we like to call him on the pod, is the one you'll know from this murder case.
You may know
He's
his best piece of work, or only really. Oh, say, can you singing back the dawn's early rise?
Juliana. Can you
Maybe.
can you stop the Fergie version real
Oh
quick?
yes, so sorry, so sorry.
I thought we agreed on the Whitney version.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. What so proudly we hail.
You can pause that now. I think people get the idea.
Yeah, they get it. It's the national anthem, baby.
Mm-hmm. Um, yeah, so he was actually a suspect for murder. Um,
While he wrote that.
while he wrote that, actually, the rocket's red glare is inspired by when the police took him into the station, and they were shining bright lights in his face and
Lanterns.
bright lanterns in his face. That was from the red flame.
Yeah, something that we all forget is while the Revolutionary War was going on, there were still murderers. Um, there were people out for blood, and I'm not talking about the redcoats versus us, the US. I'm talking about real life murders.
Mm-hmm. Let's just talk about the other two suspects real quick. Um, one of them was a Midwife.
Yes.
She practiced midwifery.
And she was darn good at it.
She was the best midwife in all of Albany, is what they called her.
And her name was Georgia. So sorry. I was about to say Georgia O'Keeffe. That's a famous painter.
No, Georgia Schillbacher.
Yes, Georgia Schillbacher. I got my Georgias mixed up.
It's common.
Yes.
Georgia O'Keeffe does come in a little bit later, though, so maybe that's why you got confused.
I was just jumping the gun. Just like someone did. Our suspect number 2, the soldier. That's right. I was talking about redcoats earlier. Well, we got a redcoat on our hands during this story. Our soldier came all the way from a small town right outside of London, and he had traveled to the US to fight for King George.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, he was fighting some demons too, inner demons.
Called PTSD from the war. And
And it wasn't even post yet, it was just traumatic stress disassociation.
current traumatic stress
C-
disorder
CTSD.
or disassociation. Back then, doctors weren't great. And so in his medical files, it just was a bunch of letters. And so they like to shorten things a lot. So we don't know exactly what it was, but it was something related to what we now know as PTSD.
We're really picking up the pieces here because a lot of this story was archived for a long time in the Smithsonian, and it was just released in their latest 50th anniversary um,
Mm. Happy
underground.
birthday, Smithy.
We love you.
And his name was Greg, the soldier.
hmm Gregory Tomowitz. Greg for short.
All right, so we have
Well,
Frank.
I guess he would have said it like Gregory Tomowitz at your
Gregory
service.
Gregory Dobowitz. What is that? What region of England is that from?
Yeah, that's just outside of London.
Oh, okay. So we have Frank, one suspect, Georgia, the other subject, Greg, the third. One of them is the murderer. As you listen along, see if you can guess,
Because
listeners.
this, I mean, it took us on a wild turn
We're on
while
the
we were reading
edge
up.
of our
hmm
seats.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the victim, the murdered?
Yes. So, the victim here, his story doesn't really get told, and it's pretty sad because he was the barber's son, and his name was Sean. They were Irish immigrants.
Sean
Um,
Barberson.
Sean Barberson, Sean Barberson, and it's really sad because Ireland didn't really have a place in this war, so all of the Irish immigrants got to just chill. They like didn't have to pick a side. They didn't have to be American. They didn't have to be British. Like they were Irish. So he was a practicing barber. His son was learning how to be a barber. And he was just sweeping hairs late one night when his dad had gone off to the only Irish pub. You know the name of it.
O'Toole's.
hmm And so he was just sweeping hair late one night, and someone came in and used a blade. You know those old fashioned blades they used to cut hair with?
Mm-hmm. Like attend the tale as I on.
Exactly. But Irish. So it's like, attend the tale of Sweeney Todd. And so they
Are the
slit his
Irish
throat.
always that off key?
Sorry, white man.
So are the Irish. Okay, so they slit his throat.
Yes.
Um,
And they left him lying there in cold blood. It was very sad. He was
mm,
only 13. 13.
only 13. Sean
13.
Barberson. So now back to our suspects. We'll kind of go over why each of them became a suspect in the first place. Um, Frank Scott Key simply he was he went to the Barbersons barber shop. He was there every every Thursday, getting his
Well,
beard trimmed, getting his mullet, or what are the big sideburns called?
lamb chops.
Lamb chops, getting his lamb chops pruned and colored.
And you can see in the famous painting of him writing his song, which we'll post
Done
on
by Georgia
Instagram.
O'Keeffe.
Exactly. You
That's
can
why
see
she comes in
that's
with
why
it.
there she is. You can see that his hair is freshly cut. Yeah, pretty scary.
Yes. So that's why he was a regular. Um, Greg, the soldier, this is a little bit sad, or is it if he's the murderer? He was visiting his wife,
Hmm.
who he didn't get to see that often because of the war,
Because she was American.
because she was American. So he was really only in town for a couple days. And people in town just really didn't like the looks of him. He
Hmm.
had a busted up face because of the war casualties. And so he was really a suspect just because the townspeople were just spreading rumors and being like, look at that freaky man. He's got to kill somebody.
And he had a British accent, not favorable after the loss of the war. And
Mm-mm.
his wife, the reason he was so hell bent on visiting, was pregnant. And that's where our third suspect comes in, Georgia, the midwife.
Mm. Yes. Continue.
Yeah. So it was a secret baby because back then in 1776, I don't know if you know this, Andrew, but from 1771 to 1776 on what was going to be American soil, you could not mate with a British person. So
Wow.
they had fallen in love and fornicated. Sorry.
Weird word choice, but.
Let me
Oh,
say
by
it
the way,
right.
how's that sausage? I've been noticing you're eating it.
Mm. It's really good. Thank you. So they
You
had
didn't have
fallen
to
in
take
love.
a bite right after I asked you the question, but I'm glad it's good.
I cooked it in prune juice. So they had fallen in love and fornicated and made a baby.
Yeah, and so how did Georgia tie into
So
that?
yes, so so of course because she was pregnant, she needed a midwife, and Georgia, the midwife, was the only midwife that would cater to a lawbreaker.
Ah,
Yes, because Georgia didn't see colors. She didn't see red and blue, much less red, white, and blue. She saw love.
she saw pink and red, the
Yeah,
colors of love.
and
So
the
I'm still
colors that you
confused
see when you
how,
birth a baby.
because of blood and pussy folds.
I was gonna say vaginal tissue.
um, so I'm still a little bit confused about how Georgia was a suspect.
She was a suspect because Greg Tomowitz was seen leaving his pregnant, not even wife's house yet. And guess who he was seen by? Sean. And Sean went to his pregnant
Mm.
wife and said, I'm sorry, ma'am, I'm going to have to turn you in. And the midwife was there. And she said, for what? And he was like, I'm going to have to turn her in because she's pregnant with a Britishman's baby. And
Oh,
the
she had
midwife
the
was like,
motive.
and the midwife was like, not on my watch. But she didn't say that because she was a midwife.
Okay, so those are the that's what we got for
The
the
suspects.
suspects. Lest you've forgotten, listeners, there was one witness, and there was a lot of talk in the town at the time of who did this, lots of speculation. Those three
Hmm.
were brought in for questioning. You know, the lantern, the rocket's red glare, you might remember. You
Hmm.
want to play the Fergie part, rocket's red glare?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The bombs bursting in a yeah. They probe through the night that our flag was still there. Yeah.
Amazing. Um, but the witness is really what sealed the deal.
Mm-hmm.
You gonna tell about the witness?
Yes, so the witness was a pretty popular member of society. She was the only British person that turned on Britain. Her name was Sally O'Fields. And you might say O'Field sounds Irish. Well, she was half Irish. So she kind of had that thing where, like, because she was half Irish, she didn't really care about the war. And she had also fallen in love with a American.
So
And
she
that
knew
mhm.
the struggle that Georgia and Gregory were going through.
Yeah, and she just didn't care. She was like, I don't know why we're doing this war thing. Like, we should all have peace. And so she was going to the barber shop because that's where her husband got his haircut to get him some pomade. And that's when she witnessed someone slit Sean's throat.
So she witnessed, or we have written record of this somehow. I think it was her diary.
Yeah, it was her diary. And then also, um, the town crier needed something to cry the next day. So
Oh, so we have the
she wrote him a blurb.
gotcha.
Hmm.
So she saw this happen, immediately ran into the barbershop. Um, assailant was gone at this point. She was wearing a petticoat, so she couldn't run that fast. But
And
she
she was barefoot.
and she was barefoot, and I think she had tuberculosis at the time.
1000% she had tuberculosis. Hmm.
So she goes over and goes up to uh, Sean.
Hmm.
Goes up to Sean, and she's expecting to see red, maybe a little pink. The
Hmm.
colors of birth. Uh, but it's sticky, and so she's like, "Wait, is this blood?" She I don't know what compelled her to do this, but she touched it to her tongue. It wasn't blood. It was prune juice.
Yep.
That's right. That's the first crazy thing that happened. The throat was not slit. Sean was just deathly allergic to prunes, and the assailant knew that
Yep.
and used prune juice to kill him.
Yep. And that sliding across the throat motion was just the assailant pouring prune juice down his throat.
Hmm. And
Hmm.
splashing it around his face.
Yep.
So
Oh,
that's
I know what the assailant was wearing. A hooded cloak. And then it was fringed at the bottom, and she couldn't tell if it was lace or if it was just worn. So that's why it could have been a woman or a man, because she
mm,
was like, I didn't see the face, but like the cloak could have had, some sort of decoration on it. She couldn't tell. Um, but eventually, while she was writing it down, she kind of sussed out a couple of other things. You know how when you're like adrenaline pumping, you remember things more.
hmm
She remembered the cloak was blue, and only boys were allowed to have blue cloaks back then.
So that immediately ruled out Georgia. And then
Yep.
this took her a few days to remember, but she had a little for the next couple days she had like a little melody stuck in her head, and she couldn't remember where it came from, and she just kept coming humming. And as it turned out, the murderer was humming that as he was running away,
Mhm.
which, if you don't know by now,
Is Frank Scott Key.
is Frank Scott Key. And then this is the reason why he knew that Sean was allergic to prunes, because he was there every week. He was a regular. They shoot the shit in that chair for an hour a
Yep.
week.
Yep. And the reason, you want to know the reason he
I
did all
really
this?
do.
One of his chops was uneven.
And
Yeah.
history has let him skate by because he wrote our national anthem,
And
which
it's
doesn't even have a
the
bass
most
drop.
popular song of all time. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Have you heard of Night Changes by One Direction? Have you heard of Trouble by Elvis sang by Austin Butler?
Have you heard any song by Tupac?
Have you heard of the song that they kept playing at the Oscars every time All's Quiet at the Western Front won? And so Miss Sally O. Fields told the town crier, "Hey, Frank Scott Key is a murderer."
And the town crier cried that shit to infinity and beyond, but nobody listened. That's the
No
thing. If
one.
a crier cries in the woods and there's no one to listen, does he really cry? The answer is no.
He doesn't.
So that's the story of how our national anthem author was a
Is
murderer as
also a
well
murderer.
as a racist.
He's a murderer, racist, and guess what? He never grew back that mutton hair, that little lamb chop, that little mutton chop at the end of his hair.
Because turns out he was also allergic to prune juice and a little bit splashed on him.
Yep,
Right,
because he
just
was
right there.
hiding it in his cloak the
His
whole
blue cloak
time. That was tattered.
with rain and soot and ash.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light, which are brightly we
I think we also have the Shakira version on file.
Lole, lole, lole. Lole, lole, lole.
See, it's unrecognizable. That's the great thing about the song is that it's since Frank wrote it, it's not his anymore. It's a new person's, whoever sings it.
It's public domain.
Hell yeah. He's
We
not
can mix
making.
it with whatever song we want. Monster Mash, X, Frank Scott Key. We could,
We could, but we don't have that ready right now to play on air.
but just know we could.
We could. All right, that's that.
Another murderer, come and gone.